Everybody, and welcome to this video which covers the Yerkes-Dodson law of arousal and how it applies to sports psychology as part of the Stage 1 psychology course. So this should be especially helpful for tests and exams. So let's get into it. So the Yerkes-Dodson law of arousal is very important in sports psychology. So our level of arousal, in other words, our level of stress, is closely related to task performance. So what that means is, depending on if we're too calm or too stressed or we're somewhere in the middle, that will actually directly affect our performance on certain tasks. Now, obviously, this is very applicable to sport, but this is also applicable to other tasks as well. So things like exams, tests, playing music, performing a speech, the list goes on. So let's get into what the law actually states. So humans need a low level of arousal, so we need to be calm, in other words, for a difficult cognitive task, and a high level of arousal, so be more stressed, for a simple cognitive task. So according to this law, if we actually can manipulate or change our level of arousal, it will mean that we can do tasks better. If it's the opposite to what the task asks for, however, it can make our performance worse. So if we're doing a very difficult cognitive task and we're too stressed, we're not going to perform as well. If we're doing a relatively simple cognitive task and we're too relaxed, then we're not going to do it optimally either. So that's why it's often agreed that the best level is in the middle. So it's better to have medium level of arousal for most tasks, but we'll get more into that as the video goes on. So the ultimate goal is to achieve an optimum level of arousal, or OLA. So this means we will perform the task at the best level of physiological arousal or stress. Now, obviously, this is very relevant in sport, and athletes need to manage their level of arousal so they're able to perform their sport or perform their task at the best possible level. So let's get into the difference between a simple versus difficult cognitive task. So a simple cognitive task is a task that does not require a high level of mental concentration or cognition, whereas a difficult task is a task that does. So it requires concentration every single time it's performed. So this is obviously relevant in sports psychology. We can see here with a weightlifter, that would be defined as a simple cognitive task. Certainly not a simple physical task, not saying that in any way, shape or form, but it is a simple cognitive task because it is the same repeated motion every single time. And because a weightlifter at this level has done so much practice and so much training, it becomes a simple task cognitively to them. So it's actually better that they are more stressed out and more hyped up because they're more likely to have an adrenaline release or more, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, etc., that they're able to actually get the task done, which in this case is lift a huge amount of weight over their head. Whereas an archist or an archery athlete needs to concentrate every single time on the actual shot. So it requires them to be more calm and have a lower level of arousal in order to be more likely to hit the target. So depending on what the sport is or what the task is will dictate what level of arousal, or how stressed out we are, in other words, we should be in to perform the actual task at the optimal level. So this is how the Yerkes-Dodson law is often illustrated. So we've got our level of arousal down here on the x-axis and our performance here on the y-axis, because that's what we measure. So we can see here that if our level of arousal is too low, okay, we will be fatigued, we will be bored, and we may even be at risk of falling asleep. Now, that's obviously not going to put us in the right state, especially if we're performing a simple task where we need to increase our level of arousal, or our level of stress, in other words. So being fatigued and sleepy and bored before running a 100-meter race is obviously not going to benefit our performance. Then we've got the high end here, so the high level of arousal. So we've got strong stress, anxiety, which will obviously impair performance as well. We would also classify this as panic. So if we are panicking before a particular task, even if it is a simple task, that's also not ideal because we're not going to perform it optimally. So obviously we don't want someone who is doing archery to be in this state because they're going to be quite shaky and therefore they're going to be inaccurate, leading to lower performance. So according to the Yerkes-Dodson law, the optimal arousal is in the middle. We don't want to be too bored, but we don't want to be too stressed. So we want to be alert and motivated to do the task, but not be so bored or so stressed that it actually impairs performance. So that's why the OLA is often in the middle, as I said before. So let's summarize. So too little arousal, we are bored, we're tired, we may not perform the task at the optimal level. But if we're too stressed, okay, we're going to be nervous, hyperactive, and even panicking, and we're not going to perform the task at the optimal level either. So the OLA does depend on the familiarity and or the difficulty of the task. So we did discuss this in class, or we will discuss this in class, that the more times we do a behavior, then our level of arousal may need to shift. So if we're doing something for the first time that requires a lot of cognition or a lot of concentration, yes, we should be as calm as possible when we first do it. But as we get more familiar with the task and it becomes a relatively simple cognitive task to us, then we need to manipulate our level of arousal accordingly. So we can start with needing one level of arousal and then shift to the other, the more familiar we become with the task or the more practice that we do. There's also individual differences to consider because no two people are the same. Individual differences such as people being natural thrill seekers. So some people really like the feeling of being at a high level of arousal. So they find that thrill-seeking sensation very, very pleasurable. But obviously that needs to be taken into account when doing certain tasks that it may actually hinder performance. We do talk about thrill seekers in another video. But for now, I hope you found this video useful. As always, any questions, let me know. Otherwise, happy revising.